Hey,
Hello,
thank
everyone.
you so much for joining us. My name is Perdie and I'm Head of Program at TechHub. I'm here with Margaret Ann.
I'm Program Coordinator at TechHub.
And we are here today with Georgie from N26, and we're going to greet her in a second to talk a little bit more and to answer some of your questions and some of the questions that we have for her. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to anybody that has not been to one of our events before or doesn't know that much about TechHub. So TechHub is a community of technology entrepreneurs and startups. We are talking now from TechHub in London, where we've got 400 startups who are part of our community, all building technology products. And as well as them having a community to be part of and a space to work from, we also provide a program of events and activities for them to do to help them engage with each other. So it's things like getting access to investors, access to tech talent, access to one another, CXO meetups, so the CTOs can all get together, the CEOs can all get together, that kind of thing, and have that real community and supportive role so that they're not alone when they're growing their businesses together. If you want to find out anything more about who TechHub are or what TechHub do, you can go to our website, techhub.com. And if you want to find out about some of the other events that we run as part of our growth program, you can check out the event site on our web page as well. And right at the end, we'll talk a bit more about some of the other fireside chats that we've got coming up, which are open to everybody in the ecosystem. I'm going to pass over to Margaret Ann, who's going to talk a bit more about what you can expect from today.
Hello, as Perdie said, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Even though we can't see anybody, we're still very happy that you're tuning in. So for this evening, the first 45 minutes is going to be a chat between myself and our guest, Georgie Smallwood, is the CPO of N26, which we'll be hearing all about this evening. After the first 45 minutes, we're going to turn it over to you, the audience, and you'll be able to ask questions. Any questions that you have throughout the chat or during the Q&A portion, just type it into the little chat section on the side of your screen, and we'll be able to pull questions directly from that. So, as we're going through the chat, anything that comes to mind, just plop it in there, and we'll definitely be able to get that answered for you. So with that, please follow along on social media. If you'd like to tag us at TechHub, at N26, and hashtag TechHub Tuesday. It is Tuesday. It is Tuesday today, so we can do TechHub Tuesday. So with that, we're going to get started.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yep. So I want to get started hearing a little bit about N26.
Yeah, for sure. So hi, thanks everyone for joining. It was a pleasure to be here. It's funny, I'm still in my house in Berlin, which is much easier, but I did put a fresh shirt on for you, so appreciate that. So yeah, I'm Georgie Smallwood. I am the CPO at N26. I look after product management, product design, user research, product marketing at globally. So we have offices in Barcelona, in New York, in Vienna, and we have 4 offices now in Berlin. And we are around about 1,500 employees. If you don't know much about N26, we are a bank account for every day. I think that's the biggest differentiator for us, is that an N26 bank account is something that you can set up really quickly. It's easy. You can do it directly from your phone. You can add funds and start paying from your phone. You don't need to leave. You can come home from work, not have a bank account, 25 minutes later be buying something online with the N26 bank account. So that's really our USP. We're about simplicity, ease, but very much focused on the everyday banking scene. So making banking easy and accessible for everyone around the world.
Thank you. And when did you join the company?
I joined in the middle of 2018. So just 2 years ago now. I joined from Melbourne. I've been traveling around the world for the last 10 years, but I was back in Melbourne, my hometown, working at Xero, and which is you guys in London will know about it. We have a big presence, or Xero has a big presence in London, accounting platform servicing SMBs around the world, making sure that they can get along with their business and what they do. And N26 gave me a call. I have a long history of bouncing around the world for companies that are building exciting products in hypergrowth environments. And N26 calling me was like a siren call. I think they had a product at the time which was wildly successful. They were only 3 years old as a company, and they had about 800,000 customers. The company itself was about 380 people, and most of that was in customer support. So I think that I joined, the team was really small. There was 7 or 8 product people and 9 or 10 designers. And it's just exploded from there. We're at about 125 in product and design now after 2 years. And the customer growth we've gone from 800,000 to almost 6 million. Yeah.
And where's the largest concentration of customers for you? What's the largest market?
Germany, France, Spain, mainly. They each have different nuances. So from a primary banking perspective, Germany is a huge market for us. Also France is very big on digital banking. They're really digitally savvy, the French bankers. And Spain is a really, really fast growing market, as is Italy as well. US is a market that we're investing in, and we're hoping that can reach huge potential. Obviously, everyone wants the US market. But we have those different focuses. So core European markets, because we're in 25 markets globally. But those kind of core 4 or 5 European markets are one of our big focuses, and the US market is the other. Yeah. And
in the UK, we have a lot of digital disruptor banks. I don't know what the landscape is like in Germany and France and Italy. But what are your distinguishers between the other mobile banks?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the UK market has historically been like really innovative as far as financial products are concerned, even before FinTech, right? Even with the traditional banks, investment banking, equity markets, things like that. We see the FinTech scenes really rising quickly in the European markets. They did take a little bit longer than Europe and than the UK and the US. I think the differentiator for N26 from fintechs in general is that we're very focused on the everyday banking side, which is historically the very traditional space. And fintech really boomed as an industry out of the subsets of products that come through in traditional banks. So savings, like with Raisin, or trading, like with Robinhood, and those kind of subsets of the banking product. Whereas we've always been primarily focused and kind of laser focused on making sure that everyday transaction, so things for getting the account, accessing the account, getting money in, getting money out, payment at point of sale, keeping you informed on your funding, things like that. That's our big differentiator. I think probably the closest is or the most similar and doing really, really well is Monzo. Is very focused on everyday banking as well and doing a great job.
Okay. I'm really curious. I want to go back to what you're saying about how you joined in 2018 when the product had kind of already hit scale and had found product market fit, but wasn't, at the point of growth that it is now. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what's it like joining a startup that is still in the early days, but kind of knows the direction that it's going.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that I like about this phase is that there's no straight answer for like if you're successful, you're going to hit this phase, and that is that you've got a great idea that you've operationalized, you've managed to bring it to life, and it's got some runway. But it's then what next is concerned, and that's sometimes a really hard point, because often it was a runaway train if it happened, and you kind of, and this is with most companies that I've worked for, and then you get to this point and you think you have to do the next thing. And one of the things that was one of the challenges I faced was that N26 was so successful as a startup, and it was, in Europe especially quite iconic from a design perspective, and we see the influence that it's had across the fintechs that are coming to market now. But if you want to stay a pioneer in a field, you have to continue to do the icebreaker job, and that's quite scary, because I think you're gambling your success. Probably still got some runway ahead of you, so that you can break the next iceberg and really kind of start that next hockey stick. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges when coming in, is the mindset of the organization, the founders, the executive team. What direction are we taking this? Are we going to run out this hockey stick? And then you're probably looking for an acquisition or something along those lines. Or do we want to continue to be the icebreaker organization? But that means that takes quite a bit of guts and really hard decisions as well.
Georgie, that's really interesting. I know we're going to touch on this later, but I just want to ask quickly on that note, how do you know as the CPO, like whether or not to, how do you know when to start something new rather than like double down on what's already working for you? And it was probably a big, but
God, isn't it the question? Like, I think in a product organization, that's called prioritization, which is like the word that gets uttered every single day. But I think you really need to have a clear idea on where you want to go. And that is much more easily said than done, because to define where you want to go, you need to decide you're not going to do those other things, which is much harder than deciding actually where it is you want to go. And when I say like, where do you want to go, I kind of mean, where do you want to play? So what customers are you going to go for? What markets are you going to go for? What problems are you going to solve? And then you're not doing the other things. And so that helps to decide if you're going to double down or reinvest in something versus put something on the shelf for a little bit and then maybe pick it up later. And then you need to work out how much maintenance is required for that functionality. Or maybe it's something that you're just going to just put the lid on for a bit and come back to in 2 quarters or a year. And you're actually going to say, right, this is what we're going to do, because we want to win the UK and Ireland. And these things are going to get us there. This is fine. This can sit there for a while. But the only way to work out what you're going to double down on or what you're going to build is to understand where you want to go. Otherwise, you're just going to end up in this squiggly line where you're going in a direction, but one day you'll wake up and you will know what direction you want to go in, and you won't know where you are in relation to that point.
So on that subject, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in the UK? Because I know you guys launched in the UK and then shut it down recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched in the UK. The launch was a month or two after I started. So a lot of work went into entering the UK because it was the first multi-currency market that we went into. So we were a euro denomination before that. And so there was a lot of infrastructure work required to go to pound as well, which helped us for our US launch too. When we went there, we had lots of things that we wanted to do, right? So we went to the UK, we had plans to go to the US. After that, we wanted to go to Brazil. We had increasing competition in the European markets. So lots more kind of smaller niche products were coming up, but we were starting to see traditional banks innovate from a digital perspective. We were starting to see the apps get better. We were starting to see, more single function apps branch out as everyone got a card in every tech company in Europe added a debit card in the last 12 months. And so we were really split as far as our focus was concerned. And that was something that we'd been talking about for a long time. And when we did find out about the Brexit, we were perhaps a little too optimistic as to what Brexit would bring for us. And being optimistic meant that we didn't have to make any tough decisions, which no one really likes doing that. But then when we understood the requirements that we would need to do to to fulfill the FCA requirements from a UK perspective, that would have taken up a lot of our capacity. And with the ambitions, knowing where we wanted to go and knowing how important the US was to us, and doubling down in those core European markets, we decided that the hard decision, but the right decision, was to exit the market if we couldn't commit to being the number one, having a real crack at being the number one in the market. I think that was a really, really tough decision. I think, but it's a decision that I'm really proud of, because if you don't make those decisions, then you continue to not focus on the areas that you want to develop.
Makes sense. Well, on that topic of product design, I'm going to pass it over to Perdie and continue this discussion.
Cool. Yeah. So to kind of get us started, can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a CPO, what that role actually involves?
I think it's going to be different depending on the CPO that you talk to or the company that you go into. I think there's one thing that I am very passionate about, and I'm passionate about because I realized it when I became the CPO, not before, is that, I've been building products pretty much my whole career, like regardless of the title. Like, 12, 13 years ago, I wasn't called a product manager. I was a media coordinator or a operations manager, but I was building products. And that has been what I've done. And the difference between being a product manager and being a product leader, especially when you move into the C-level, is that you're still a product manager, but your product changes. So your product becomes the team and how that team is set up. So all of the ways of thinking around iterative development, around story mapping, about working out what the MVP is, so knowing what you want your product to look like in the future and making sure that your development gets you in that direction. You need to take all of that and apply it to the team. Yeah. So what kind of a product do you want to build? What skills do you need? How diverse do you want your team to be? And what's important to you as far as the values and the principles of your team is concerned? Yeah. But you also need to consider what kind of a company that you work in, and because you need the team to be successful within the organization. So you need to take that into account. And then, as a good product manager does, map your stakeholders and make sure you know what it is that they need to support you. I think for me, my stakeholders changed completely because all of a sudden all my peers are not product people anymore, and I can't, talk about, let's just story map that, or let's get some Post-its. People in BizOps don't use Post-its. And so that was a little bit of an adjustment, and I had to really think about how I communicated, because for so long I've been communicating in the builders organization, like the product, the tech, the design, and all of a sudden I was needing to communicate to the legal, the senior legal organization, not just the legal advisor that helped me as a product manager. And so knowing that, and knowing how to build your team, how to make it successful, how to scale that team or how to not scale that team, but still make it more efficient, because of course you always want to build more. Yeah. That's the biggest change about the role of CPO, I think. And I never could have believed how much kind of psychology is involved in that, and how much emotional intelligence is part of that senior role. Because you always think as a product manager, you look and you go, oh gosh, when I'm the CPO, I'll have all the answers. Sorry.
How big is your team currently? The kind of the product team?
The product team is around 44.
Yeah. And they're divided between different locations, are they?
Yeah, so we have product people in all locations now. So we've got a head of product starting in Vienna in a couple of weeks. So New York, Barcelona, Vienna, and Berlin.
Yeah. And so there's a kind of thing with managing teams remotely as well, which I know is going to be a huge question for startup founders at the moment, especially because everyone is working remote because of COVID. So when it comes to kind of scaling your team, one of the biggest challenges that we have from the founders that we speak to is like, there's a massive thing around hiring, especially technical talent, but then how do you scale culture and especially if you've got remote workers. So do you have any tips around that? I'm just going to turn the light on whilst you're answering that question, because it's
no, sure. I think that one of the things, so I'll be honest, like we were all in Berlin. Everyone was in Berlin when I started. So we opened the Barcelona office at the beginning of 2019.
Yeah.
And we've had like many mistakes, right, with setting up teams in different offices. And, we try and learn as we go and get a lot of feedback. I think what has been really interesting, and probably in Berlin, we didn't realize it until COVID happened, but there is a natural headquarters, regardless of what you do, regardless of the important products that you put in other markets. And we consciously put really, really, really important products into Barcelona, into Vienna, into New York. There's still an innate decision-making that hubs around wherever most of your executives are based. Yeah. And I think that COVID broke that for us, which I think is a really good thing. And what happened was an equality. So everyone's dialing in now. So, I would like to keep that. So I think that gone will be the days where most of the people on the meeting are sitting in a room in Berlin, and then 1/3 of the attendees are either in Vienna or Barcelona or New York. I think if we can try and, if that's the case, then we should all just dial in from our desks.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you have an imbalance of the chit chat, and that's when the culture gets built. Yeah. So you need to scale the offline conversation as well. So if it's that you all dial in, but you finish your meetings at 2:50, and then you don't all jump off the call and go and do your own thing. You then have 10 minutes of, you just keep it on and you chat and do other things. But I think that technology can create equality, but it can also create isolation, and you need to think about what different things can bring people together with technology as opposed to kind of making it lonely.
Yeah, totally. We're going to talk a bit more about COVID and how you guys have reacted to it, and a bit more about fundraising, because you guys raised money mid-COVID as well. But have you actually hired anyone over the past few months whilst you've been in lockdown and had to train them remotely?
Yes. So we slowed down hugely because it is very difficult to remotely onboard. And we have historically hired a lot of people, and we do think that now at 1,500 now is a leveling time for us to make sure that we bring some of that stability back through that. I mean, we literally grew from 400 to 1,500 in 12 months. So that creates some challenges. And so it's a good time for us. But there were some really key hires who we had either hired just before COVID happened, or we were closing out just as it was occurring. And we have onboarded a number of those people. It hasn't been the same. And I think that when everyone comes into the office, they'll have like a weird new onboarding where they don't know what floor they live on and where the kitchen is. But from a content perspective, it's been really quite good. One of the things I highly recommend, and which we did really, really early in the product and design side of the business, was invest in the collaborative tools that you can use. So we use Figma as a collaborative tool, and actually we were testing it just before COVID came in place, and literally I think the second week of COVID I rolled out a license for everyone in the team, just because we needed to over communicate and over collaborate, especially at the beginning, so we could learn how to do this together. And now we're actually pulling a lot of tools into getting rid of a lot of tools and doing all that stuff in Figma now. So I do recommend, if you are doing things remotely, or everyone is at the moment, do look at the collaboration tools like Miro, like Figma, like Jamboard, things like that, because that has helped not only from just a general team perspective, but with onboarding, because then you can talk through things together and you can explain things.
Yeah.
The other thing that really helped was that about 8 8 to 12 months ago, we really did a mass migration of content from the very messy Drive documents into Confluence and Jira from a product and engineering perspective. And that has helped us onboard people in a huge way. We still miss things. And sometimes I recently shared, we have a Growth 26 document, which for every team, everyone builds one. And it has the career progression and, the expectation of levels and things like that. And I posted it on the product and design Slack channel the other day, and at least 15 people were like, I've never seen this. I was like, oh God. But we try and over communicate and kind of bring people together. We also have an unofficial buddy system. But it hasn't been easy. Like, we still have people who've joined during COVID, and also a lot of people, most people, move countries when they start working at N26. So we actually have one person in the team who's still just going from Airbnb to Airbnb because they can't get into the country that they're going to work in, and they'd already given up their flat. So we're trying to help through things like that, and sending chest of drawers to people who are still living out of luggages.
Yeah, it's a crazy time, and people, everyone needs to learn from each other, because everyone's kind of going through this situation for the first time, whether they're a huge corporate company that's making everyone remote together when they were really anti it before, or some nimble startup that, they have a different set of problems. But it's good for everyone to just talk and share tips, because that's how everybody's going to improve. Last question on the product side of things is about trust, because obviously, especially I think with FinTech, and when it comes to people's money and people giving you their money, there's a huge amount of trust that has to be developed in that relationship, which is something that the traditional banks, just because they've been around longer, that's their angle. Whereas the challenger banks at the beginning, they had to kind of earn people's trust. How do you, I guess, build trust into a product, or what do you do to try and communicate that you're trustworthy as an organization?
Yeah, so it's essentially our number one principle, and it comes in every single thing that we do. So if you walk around our office, you'll see things on the wall about different nuances of accessibility, because everyone thinks about trust differently as well. So, or they think that they do. But what is really interesting is I recently did a presentation on designing for trust, and I think that the way that we look at trust is right from the very beginning, and we use an equation. Right? We're a bank, and essentially, you've got trust is the same, right? It doesn't matter if you trust a person, you trust a friend, you trust a bank, you trust I don't know, anything, but it's essentially credibility, reliability, and intimacy. So if you take it from a date perspective, let's say you're on a first date, credibility is you asked your friend and they vouch that this person was okay. Yeah. Reliability, they weren't late, or if they were, they sent you a text, they said, I'll be there in 5 minutes. And intimacy is not that. Is more, do you feel yourself with them? Do you feel like, you can be yourself, and that's you're really relaxed and comfortable? Yeah. But those things are really important. But the most important thing is that they are over self-orientation. So you need to be able to feel like you're in control and that you've got this, because, trust isn't built when you feel like someone else is controlling you, or you don't feel like you have any power in the situation. And so the way that we look at it is exactly the same way. Yeah. So credibility is, a lot around referral, and we get a lot of our signups from friend referral. Less as we grow, because we're starting to get more performance. But until 6 months ago, we had huge amounts of friend referral, and we're actually starting to see that pick back up post COVID. From a reliability perspective, this is kind of scale, service time, login downtime, making sure that we communicate if things are down and things like that. Intimacy comes into play quite interestingly in software and technology, because it's all about UX, right? And does it feel like you, and can you relate to it, and do you feel like that the environment understands you. And so that is about messaging and positioning and making sure that things like the things that are important to you are easy to access. But self-orientation is the part where it's kind of the money shot as far as software is concerned, because self-orientation is, can I create this myself? Right. And people don't want to create from scratch. Like, we've all signed up to things where they say, build your own, whatever it is. And you think it's a great idea. And then you never actually do it because you can't work out how to make it effective. But self-orientation is, for instance, when we built Spaces, being able to set a space up, which is a sub account, really quickly, call it something yourself. It's not some generic number, add a picture of your choice to it and really kind of create a space which is something that is for you, because, you're saving for a trip, or you're saving for a house, or you're just putting money aside so that you've got a nest egg. And that self-orientation is there as well. So it's in everything. And I think that trust is something that is quite universal as well. So it's the same in every country. Humans all build trust the same way. What they need might be different, but they do it the same way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to bring Margaret Ann back on, and she's going to continue the COVID conversation.
Cool.
So we already started digging into COVID, and Perdie mentioned how you guys had to carry on from your Series D round. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what was the experience like when you had to fundraise 100 million during Corona.
So it was interesting. So those were, full disclosure, like, we didn't start the fundraising in Corona. So we, as most of your tech companies who are doing fundraising or have investors already on board, there's a constant conversation with investors about what they are doing and what you're doing and how they believe in the kind of the future success of the organization. I think one of the things that's great about N26 is the incredibly high quality of investors that we have. Working with Insight, working with Tencent, working with Allianz, and we talk to them regularly. They are huge believers in scaling accessible banking globally. And I think that was one of the reasons why we were successful in raising additional funds during this period, is on one hand, the acceleration that we start to see for the digitization of banking. So if there was a kind of a drag on the innovation, it was probably at point of sale, where you have especially in, Germany is the most cash-based society in Europe. No coffee shop has had a digital point of sale. And COVID really drove that digitization. So within 3 or 4 weeks, every small business had a Go Cardless or a Square or something that they were using for digital point of sale. And so seeing that adoption go up and seeing different customer groups start to adopt Tap and Go and things like that, it's a really big endorsement for digital banking globally.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually leads perfectly into my next question. I'm really curious to hear, I imagine you see so much customer data. How have you seen consumer behavior change throughout the timeline of COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have seen massive changes, right? And people are just moving away from cash really fast. So, and whether that's because, there's lots of reasons of Corona because of that. Like, ATM withdrawals have gone down hugely. Obviously, you need to change your revenue structure if you're making money from that side of things as well. The largest drop in cash usage we saw was in Spain. Obviously, like, they were locked in their houses for 3.5 months, and they were forced to adopt online payments. And so we saw a huge lift in that, and we just haven't seen it come back. So as people have more access to outside and they have more ways of getting around and going back to normal, we just don't see a return to cash like it was before. And don't think that we will, because even in the markets like Germany and Italy, which are incredibly cash-based societies, even they aren't running back to cash. So I think that will be really interesting over the next 6 to 12 months to see. But the other part of it is that the financial priorities of customers are changing. So I'm not sure if everyone on the call noticed, but I certainly did, is that I had surplus funds in my account at the end of the month. That's changed now. I can go out and buy things. But I did have a couple of months there where I had to question, what my financial behavior was. And what we saw was not only were people starting to save more, so proactively save more, we saw a massive increase on spaces and savings named spaces, but also what they spend their money on. So we saw a really big shift to at-home spending, so gardening, kind of digital fitness, subscription-based things. And I'm sure that some of those will die off as people get to go out, and now everyone's got an amazing garden, and probably, unless you're like me, when all the flowers have died already. But we did a lot of research around it, and 3 in 5 people say that their priorities have changed financially. So I think that, So I think that there's not only is there like what can you spend and what have you got access to, but there's also obviously there's a huge economic impact of COVID-19, and I don't think we've even begun to see the full impact. And many people have lost their jobs or are going down to part-time or lower pay. And that is going to have a huge impact on what people's priorities are in the future. And I think it's our responsibility, especially tech-based organizations who can pivot quickly, is to find out fast what it is that our customers need from us and make sure that we can respond to the changing priorities.
What's N26's largest revenue stream?
So we have 2 major revenue streams. One is premium subscriptions, and the other is our interchange, so the money that we make off transactions. Okay. So obviously with a lot less transactions, we did see a dip in revenue. What's really good is we're starting to see that come back up. What we're not seeing as much is international interchange, which is spending in another currency. Obviously. Right. But we're also kind of looking at our premium offerings and making sure that those work for the new priorities. And I think that, like I said before, I think that's our responsibility, is to, question everything. If our customers are questioning everything and changing everything that they think, then we should also do the same thing.
That makes sense. What do you touched on this a bit, but what do you see as like the largest issues facing the FinTech industry? Both short term with COVID and the longer lasting impacts?
Because of COVID or just in general?
Both.
Okay. So I think that COVID is making people kind of, they're a bit more risk averse, right? So they're not as likely to adopt new things and take a risk where financial return is concerned. Right. So I think we need to be aware of that. And that's going to be an issue for new market entrants. Probably not from an initial adoption perspective, because it's really easy to sign up to us all. But from a primary usage perspective or an activity-based perspective, I think we'll see that people, instead of doing like a 50-50 on 2 things, you'll see like a 70% with the home product or whatever it is, and then maybe they'll dabble a little bit with something else, but they won't commit. So that could be risky for the startup fintech community. And I think thinking about how you can integrate really well. So instead of just having a standalone product, like who can you partner with? Who can you kind of, I think API-based sharing is going to be really. Absolutely. I think as far as in general is concerned, I think the ownership of the consumer experience is up for grabs, right? So you have traditional banking who, leverage the longevity of the relationship that they've had with the consumer, often for decades and often through generations. And so there is that innate traditional aspect there. Then there are kind of the startups of today and the fintechs and the digital banks to an extent, which are the new kind of were the threat to the traditional banks. Honestly, I don't think that's the case. I think that there is, there's a lot of market. I think the big concern and the one that we have to be mindful of and maybe think about when you're designing your product is the tech consumer relationship. So the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons. I don't think it's a bad thing, and I don't think that it's wrong for them to have a relationship on the surface with lots of different areas of a consumer's life. But when you're building your product, you need to think about what can I give the customer that they can't, and really build your product around that and really get your claws into that space so that you can own something that is really difficult to replicate. Interesting. And I think that is the next 5 years is going to be really interesting to see how people do that, and also what the big tech guys do with the consumer experience as well, because it's theirs to grab to a certain extent. But banking in general and finance in general is also very difficult on the regulatory side. Right. So depending on how far they go into that, it'll be interesting to see what the regulators do.
Do you mean from a monopoly or getting too big perspective?
No, I mean, I think one of the challenges that, I face every day is that I'm building a global bank in an industry that is hyper local. So every market has different regulations. Even if even if we use the German banking license, you still have French laws, you have Italian laws, you have different KYC requirements by markets. So what'll be really interesting is how far big tech go into that regulatory space, or if they can just hover on top of the payment space. So I think that you just need, when you're building your product proposition, you just need to think about what are the couple of hooks that you can either go from a service perspective or I think, checkout.com just announced their latest funding round. I think that's a really good example of a, predominantly infrastructure service, which is very, very difficult to replicate. So I think that you just think about that when you're building your product. Like, what are the hooks that you can do that other people can't?
From a product perspective, you were saying that people were starting to save more with COVID, and that also most of your revenue comes through transactions. So when you're building the product, how do you balance the two, like build a product that encourages spending, but also a healthy financial behavior?
Yeah, and that's where the balance between the transaction and the premium subscription comes in as well. And that's what we're thinking about every day when we think about what we build into those subscriptions, because we don't want to be a spend society. And we know that people are really concerned about that. Well, most people, some people aren't. And how do we balance, giving you financial confidence, right? Financial confidence is the goal for us, because most people live in this cycle of anxiety around finance, and they sit there and they and it doesn't matter how much money you have as well, by the way. Like, all the research is that 95% of us sit in this anxiety cycle. So it's either like we don't have the money for the end of the month, or it might be I don't have enough money to buy a fourth BMW. I don't know. Like, that's not me. But how do we get people into a cycle of financial confidence? And so part of that is making payments easy, right? Mm-hmm. So getting money back to your family in another country easy, or being able to touch your phone at point of sale or your watch at point of sale, if that's the way that you want to do it. The flip side to that is giving a really clear overview of your finances to someone and making sure they know, maybe they're spending a bit faster this month than they were last month. And so we can tell you that. We can say, hey, maybe you should, we've got a short-term overdraft you can use, or do you want to just slow down, right? Or you've been saving for something and you haven't put any money into that savings for a long time. Is that something that you're still looking for? And so we can actually provide a lot more confidence about your finances. That's the goal, right? And the thing that's interesting is what people need to have financial confidence is different depending on the type of consumer that they are. And so instead of focusing on kind of the spenders versus the savers, we focus on the different types of personas that we have in the organization.
Interesting. How many different personas do you have for the customers?
So we have three main personas, and we have different nuances of those for each market. Yeah. So we have a younger persona who Jamie's just starting. He's got his first job. He's moving out of his parents' house. Ella is kind of early 30s. She's got that first job where you earn more than you need to spend. You may still spend it. And then we have Michael and Bianca who, they're living together. They're planning for the future. And these are personas that we see in every single market. The demographics or the socioeconomic status depends totally, right, on different markets, on different areas. But this is more about, what they're looking for, what their hopes and dreams are. Do they put money aside every month or do they not? Those kinds of things.
That's very interesting. Okay, last question for me on COVID. We were chatting a little bit before about how part of your team is in Barcelona, where they weren't even able to leave their flats for 3.5 months, which I can't believe that.
I know.
Yeah, very difficult. How do you manage a team remotely when people are not only necessarily working from home the first time, but have severe mental and possibly physical stressors in their lives?
Yeah, I think it's been a journey, a trial and error journey as well. We've tried lots of different things. Like certainly with my direct report team, I've had weeks where I've had daily check-ins. Then we moved to every 2 weeks we would have two half-hour meetings, and then we do weeklies, and we seem to change our meeting structure every week at the moment, just depending on what's required and what's needed. I think at a larger organization, so all of product and design, learning how to do asynchronous communication was really, really important. And that's something that I didn't really adopt as a leader before this, and before Barcelona. So it really started when we went to Barcelona, and I had to learn how to communicate across a much larger group of people. So not 400 anymore, but 1,500, but also people that weren't there in the room. So I couldn't pick up if they misinterpreted by body language or nuances of them glancing at someone else. And I had to really think about how I communicated. So I've done a couple of different things. So we have a weekly update. So every Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning sometimes, we send a summary of all the things that are going on in the product and design and tech organization. So just things that are happening in the week. It's normally 8 or 9 big clunks of things. Like we had to get stuff done days last week, and we said, there's a team working on this, and there's a team that join here. We use a lot of @ and hashtags and Slack channels. Also recently we're doing a lot of strategic stuff at the moment, and I wanted to communicate. We had a lot of people involved, but obviously there were also other people that weren't involved, and were hearing lots of people talk about this stuff, but they hadn't heard it specifically. So I made a 12-minute video on a Sunday afternoon just saying, hey, this is what we're doing. I want to show you a couple of slides. And I just posted it in the Slack channel on Monday morning, and I was completely surprised by the positive response to that, because people were very receptive to the fact that it wasn't another meeting booked in the calendar. It was, a 12-minute thing that they could consume at their own. They found the information really valuable, but it didn't disrupt their day. And I think I'll do much more like that in the future.
That's a good idea. Just putting that video in Slack channel, or where people can access it on their own time, as you were saying.
Yeah. And I think AMAs are really important as well, not just with me, although I do those as well, but also with other executives, because one of the things about remote is that you're not running into the executive all the time, and they can become quite distant. And it's really important that that doesn't happen, because then you form silos. And so for the first 2 months, we have, I think, 6 or 7 senior people across the organization who are really important. And my organization was saying, I don't know these people very well, and a lot of people are new. So every week we had just a half-hour AMA with one of them. And there was no prep, there was no nothing. It was on the fly, 25 minutes. Yeah. And that was really good too, because they got to ask the questions that were important about the different functions. And also the leaders got to know the teams and the questions that were worrying them.
Yeah, that's a really great idea for our founders who are tuning in tonight. I like that. For the last few questions, I'm going to pass it over to Perdie. Brief reminders to the audience, as it says on screen. Any questions, pop it in the chat and we'll call on you shortly.
So to finish off, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of your other activities that you do outside of N26, because they relate quite well to some of the other challenges that startup founders have. So you're on the board of a couple of other startups, is that right?
Yeah, I am. 2 at the moment. Media Stalker, which is a really small startup with an amazing team based out of Greece. And they are an AI solution. They look at bringing down pirated copies of things on the internet. So huge opportunity, really small, amazing, dedicated team. And I am there essentially to help them with whatever they need, to be honest.
Yeah.
And Tia.
Cool. And well, I guess the question kind of is how did that come about? Have I frozen or am I okay?
No, you're good.
Frozen on my screen. Yeah, the question is in part is how did it come about? And then in the other sense is kind of how important do you think it is for a startup to have their board, and who they should have on their board, and at what stage should they start considering getting a board, and who to look at? Like, what's the advice around from a startup perspective?
Yeah, I think there's 2 types of boards, right? Or board members. There's investors that are part of the board member, and obviously they're very important. And then there's more advisory board members. So I'm an advisory board member of both Tia Mobility and Media Stalker, both at very different stages. So I mean, most people would know, if you're in tech, around Tia Mobility, a huge competitor to Uber, Jump, or now Lime, and Bird, based out of the US. And they have, an amazing product. They're in a number of different countries in Europe. But they're competing in a really hyper competitive space. They have operational challenges, they have tech challenges. The way that I was introduced there was, to be honest, the founder reached out to me directly. And so I think as a founder of a startup, don't be afraid to reach out to people that you've heard speak, or you think that you would just like to have a conversation with, because lots of people will just say, I'm too busy. That's fine. You're going to get heaps of people that say that. But also a lot of people are looking to, we're just passionate about this industry and solving problems. And I think sometimes it can be helpful solving some different problems as well. It keeps you kind of excited and fresh and looking forward. So don't be afraid to reach out to people in the industry, or people that you've heard speak at conferences or anything like that. And just ask them straight out if they have even just 15 minutes to have a chat. And sometimes that 15 minutes is a small enough piece of time that they're like, yeah, what problem is that going to be? And then you can work out if you get along, because I think that's the other really important part about choosing advisors, is you need to get along with them, right? And it needs to be helpful. No one wants advisors who it's not easy to talk to. So I mean, the guys from Tia, Matthias, he calls me up if he has a question, or he pings me on email, and sometimes we get together, sometimes I'll just respond back. So having that relationship with your advisors is really important as well, I think.
Yeah.
With Media Stalker, they're much smaller. And so, and we're a little bit earlier in the journey. I think there it's making sure that they want to run kind of strategies past me or kind of the next step and things. I came about because a good friend of mine that I met in the industry, Spiros, he was working with them. And he identified that they needed a product person. And I do recommend, Media Stalker is really early in their journey, but I think it's fantastic that they've got a couple of advisors that are just there to help them early on, because no one's going to have all the answers, and there's so many mistakes to make. Like if you can get someone to talk to that's made a couple of them so that you can skip over some, there's going to be plenty that you're going to make by yourself. So don't make other people's mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, we always say that it's never too soon to get a board, because they kind of act as a sounding board. Obviously you can get people that have skills that you don't necessarily have in your founding team. If you're a sole founder or you're two co-founders, then you can add to that wealth of experience. If you've never done product stuff before and you get someone that's been a product manager or head of products or something on your board, then they can just give you so much knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily already have.
And you might not need that role yet, right? And you might not be able to afford the kind of person that you would want in that role. And it's better to have an advisor who can give you that level advice, as opposed to someone who can't, and then they're being there and they can't get you to where you want them to go. So sometimes it can be a really good thing very, very early on. Think of it like, even if you just don't want to do official board stuff yet, you can also find a mentor, right? In everyone's got their gaps. I think the first thing I did was work out who was the presentation person, because you don't want me to build a presentation.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were having another chat with a guy called Tom from Extend Ventures a couple of weeks ago, and one of his pieces of advice for when you're speaking to your board is don't spend the whole time like just telling them what you've been doing. Like, don't use it as an opportunity to tell them everything that's happened since you last met them, but use it as an opportunity to actually pick their brains and ask them questions, and like use their contacts, ask them whether they can open doors for you, all of that kind of stuff, because that's how they'll be the most useful.
Yeah, they're there for you. You've got nothing to prove.
Yeah. The other question was around kind of more the corporate side of things, because another thing that a lot of our members have issues with is accessing corporates if they want to sell into them, for example. And with your experience, if you work for a few corporate companies, work for startups as well, have you seen any gaps, or do you have any advice on how a startup could approach corporates if they're looking to get their foot in the door, to have them as customers or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one, because you get so many messages each day, right? So somehow I think if you can build a personal relationship with someone in the partnerships team or the sales team that's the better way to do it. So if you're at conferences, when we come back from COVID, but how you can build that relationship so that you have an advocate internally. Obviously that's not rocket science, right? I'm probably telling you everything that you already know. But that can help hugely. So I think what you said before, Perdie, is really important. Like, leverage your contacts, because in the end, it doesn't really matter how you got in the side, if you came through the partnerships manager or the receptionist, right? The priority is always going to be to an internal suggestion rather than a cold call or an email or a LinkedIn message or something like that. So leverage as many contacts as possible.
Yeah, cool. So that we can go over to the Q&A, because we've got some questions coming in. I'm going to bring Margaret Ann back so that we've got the three of us on the stream. And should we just kind of kick off in chronological order, MA? So I'm just going to get that up.
Perfect.
So talking about expansion, what was your strategy for that?
So we did a lot of due diligence on global expansion. So we have a global expansion roadmap as far as the markets, and we reassess when we're ready to enter a new market. We have focused like in the last 12 months is with the changing environment, the investment landscape, the very, very, very high. We have a very high focus on profitability. So we have slowed down the implementation of our global expansion strategy, but it's still there, right? And all the different ingredients still come into it. And some of the things that go into it are, the customer base and the market size, obviously. But also the technical infrastructure, what's available there. For us, it's things like cards, processes, how many markets can we get to with the infrastructure that we have, but also the similarities of the customer segmentation as well. So, for instance, is Jamie the same, or is he completely different in one market from the next? And then let's just say Jamie is completely different in market B. Then if the market size is big enough, you might consider investing in tweaking the product to make sure. So the US is different, right, from Europe, and the way that people think about money and the environment that they grow up in. It's a very credit-based economy. And so, but we made the conscious decision to say the market size is big enough that we will invest in making sure that the product fits. But you do need to make sure you know how far to the left you need to go to get product market fit in those markets. So yeah, so the way that we did expansion, market size, customer segmentation, and technical infrastructure. Yeah. And what kind of product team do we usually put toward global expansion? So we treat expansion as projects. So we pull together teams cross-functionally. So there's always, we know, for instance, the longest pole in the expansion tent is always payments. So we know that if we define the payments stream of work first, then we'll know what the project is going to look like, and we kind of swarm around that one.
Makes sense.
Next question. What are your plans for monetization and how that differs from Monzo/traditional lending? Noting also the recent down round for Monzo driven by a slower monetization trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've always had a strong focus on monetization, probably historically second to expansion, but we flipped that about 9 or 10 months ago, and we flipped it from to monetization or more profitability, to be honest, because you need to be able to scale, right? So what is your cost structure? What is your revenue structure? And making sure as a bank, like there are lots of costs and equity balances and things like that we need to look at. We do have some new plans for monetization. So there's a lot of things in the works at the moment. So I think you can follow us on Twitter over the next couple of months to look at that. I think, how does that do? We do believe monetization is going to be different with digital banking from traditional lending. So we will start to look at more financial products. So we wanted to make sure that one of the biggest problems in banking 4 or 5 years ago was just getting bank account, right? And making it accessible. And we think that it's fine. Like, I have had my bank account since I was 14. It's now my mortgage account. Like, I'm just classically awesome customer for my traditional bank back in Australia. But we also need to make sure that if the next generation of consumers is going to move to digital banking, like, they're going to need to grow with that digital bank. And so we do have a focus on financial products, but we want to be flexible in our offerings. So the way that we will build those financial products will be different to traditional banking. So savings, are you do you want to put your money away from a term deposit perspective, or do you want to have access to it all the time? And are you willing to give on interest for that from that perspective? From a credit perspective, how does that work? And having worked at Xero with small business, sometimes you just need $500 and that should be easy, right? And how do you get that versus, the car loan? And so really looking at the flexibility of financial products is important. But yes, note the recent down round.
You talked a lot about COVID after this question came in, but I'll put it up anyway in case there's anything else that you want to add, because she's talking about kind of how the retail banking sector can survive during and after COVID. So is there anything else in terms of kind of the recovery that you want to mention?
No, so I think that, like I just said, you need to adapt to the desires of the consumer, right? So if people are struggling and they have an increased need for confidence, or they have higher levels of anxiety around their finances, how can we help them with that? And that might not be, a new financial product. It might be more kind of a report that they get, or their financial outlook, or something like that. So you can adapt, but also you need to adapt to what they're spending on as well. So for instance, if you're giving kind of rewards or perks on, like we were on travel, that's not super valuable right at this point in time. So how can you adapt your product to the purchasing direction or the importance that the consumer has?
When we were talking about your product team, someone also asked another question, which is, how big is the dev team there?
So we have two sides of the engineering organization. So I guess the more product development side, and then there's the what we call the platform side. So that is internal IT, SRE, DevOps, things like that. In total, I think we have almost 400 engineers in the organization. In product engineering, we have about 250.
When interviewing a product manager, what is the most important thing to ask in an interview?
What have you built recently? I think that's my favorite question. The answers are widely different, and I don't mean what tech thing did you build, because we hire people that haven't been product managers, but what I find with great product managers is that they want to solve problems, right? So whether that's that they built a calendar for their friend who was trying to lose weight, or like whatever it is, like they take a problem and then they build something to solve it, or they're interested and they're curious about it. So what have you built recently kind of lends to what they're curious about, what problems that they want to solve, and what did they proactively do to go out and try and fix that problem.
It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Sorry, my neighbor's flat alarm is going off, and I really hope that nobody can hear it because it's really loud.
No. This is actually the last question that came in from the comments section. If anybody else does have any other questions that they want to ask, now is the time. Just submit it in the chat and we'll ask it after this. But I guess this is more in relation to COVID again. So have you had to delay the start date of any new joiners, or have you had to downsize any teams as a result of what's been going on with the pandemic?
Yeah, so we have delayed some new joiners. So it depended on, there was a couple of aspects to the delays. One was the seniority. Sometimes that was an aspect of it. So if they were very, very junior, and how much onboarding and how much coaching, and if we could give that during this period, if we were ready and set up, because we were not very remote, to be perfectly honest, before COVID. We may be a agile tech organization, but we're very driven startup, get the stuff done. And it was very much a in office culture. And we're one of the companies that have been, some of us have enjoyed the pleasant surprisedness of the high productivity rates, so that now we can say, see, like maybe we can get a little bit flexible. So we had to adapt. So there were some roles that we just didn't feel like we could onboard properly. We also had some people who are needing to move countries, so we delayed those as well. We haven't specifically laid off people. What we did use I think it's called, I know I always get this word wrong in English, is furlough. Is that right?
Yeah, furlough.
It's called Kurzarbeit in German. I can't believe I know the German word, not the English one. So we have been able to leverage that, which has been great. I mean, it's not great, right? It's horrible. And it's very difficult for the people that are on it. But from a company perspective, and being able to keep that talent, and to help us during this period while the revenue, kind of the interchange revenue dropped, it was very helpful. But those were quite hard conversations. We tried to have them early. We weren't some of the first companies to do it. A lot of companies in Berlin were much faster on the Kurzarbeit than we were, but we wanted to look at all the costs and see what we could get down before we got to the human part. Unfortunately, we weren't able to avoid it, but I think that it was successful in its endeavor. Yeah.
Another 2 questions that have just come in. So actually really good question that we haven't asked yet so far, which is about diversity. How are you thinking about it? I guess in terms of kind of the product, but also, with the team in terms of promoting diversity.
Yeah, so I think about it a lot. Obviously, as a female tech executive, it kind of becomes a part of my job. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, to be honest. Probably a bad thing, but I have no problem in taking that chalice up. I'm a high believer that diversity is an essential ingredient to high-performing teams. I think that what is naive is to think that diversity creates high-performing teams, because diversity in its very nature just creates tension, to be honest. And you need to create an environment that people respect and value everyone's opinion, and that's much harder than hiring a diverse set of people. And so I talk a lot about that in my team, in the company, in different places, because you need to be able to hold a team together that's diverse. And that doesn't mean that everyone has to be, boys or girls, or it doesn't matter what sex you are. It doesn't matter what color you are. The reality is that diversity comes from experiences, right? And unfortunately, we live in a world where sex does matter and color does matter, and because it shapes the experiences that you have as a human in the world. And we need all of those humans in teams to get the best outcomes. But the more important thing that we need in those teams is to have people that respect and value each other's contribution. And so I am a big and passionate believer in that. We do lots of different things. We have employee groups at N26. I'm the executive sponsor of the Women's ERG, which is obviously for kind of females or people that identify as women in the workplace. But we also take a big stance in different other diversity, like with Black Lives Matter. We've had lots of conversations there about what we can do, what aren't we doing better. We could probably definitely do more, but it's important more to have a respectful environment of people's opinions. And I think if you can think about it, especially the founders maybe who are listening, if you can think about, your team, like, be conscious, right? Start with unconscious bias, recognize where you have those, look at your team meetings, who's talking, who's not talking, do you have enough voices in the room? Those things matter, and they matter because they'll build you a better company. And I think that's the outcome for all of us.
Yeah.
Middle East and India market, not yet, no. So we are looking. I think every market is booming at this point in time. I think South America with Nubank and a couple of new market entrants there. Asia Pacific with the bazillion new digital banking licenses that are being issued in Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia. I think everything is completely booming. Africa has a huge, especially on the payment side of things, ecosystem there. Who knows which one will be next? I think our eyes are focused on making sure that the US is successful, potentially looking at South America, and I think perhaps Asia Pacific as well.
The last question that came in was just a follow-up from the question about having delayed joiners or having to lay people off, which is more about kind of communication. So how do you make sure that you communicate right to those people? I guess it's quite a difficult conversation to have. So any advice there?
Yeah. So firstly, I'm sorry, I can't make the conversation easier for you. I think the key, or maybe the thing that I think helped, was being open and transparent and not pretending that it's an easy thing to do. Like, you make it tough. These are tough decisions, and you didn't hire people so that you could ask them if they could go on Kurzarbeit or part-time work. Or I think being as transparent as possible and being as human as possible, that was the feedback that I got was that it felt like they were part of a decision, and they could understand that this was a tough call. It was a business decision, not a personal decision. I think also you need to, especially as if you're a founder or if you're a leader, you need to have the conversation. Don't delegate the conversation to someone else. And I think that's really, really important. You might not be able to have the first conversation with everyone, but make sure that at some point you're having that conversation, because there's a respect involved there, and people have a recognition for the fact that you took the time to have that with them.
Yeah, I totally agree. So one more question has just come in, which is about how important when you're hiring a product manager in terms of their experience, and this person has given a couple of examples about what you would prioritize.
Yeah, so if you had to choose between like a UX PM or a technical PM, depends on what you're building, I guess. I think I'm in a world now where I have multiple domains that we work in. So we have a global experience team or domain, and they have multiple segments in that domain. And then we have a platform domain as well. And it doesn't mean that the more technical PMs are in the platform domain and the UX are in the experience, but we needed a combination of different skills. And sometimes we found that, engineers make great product managers in certain aspects. But it's also not just a skills-based thing, because being a product manager at its very essence is communication, clarity, being able to manage lots of different stakeholders and kind of come out with a clear path. And those are more soft skills than hard skills. And anyone can have those things. I think what you need that as a basis on every product manager, regardless of if they're technical or they're UX focused. And underneath that, you can hire for background. So whether they have a payments experience or they have a core banking or an infrastructure experience. I think it's good to have people that have some people that have jumped around and done different things and have focused mainly on that soft skill part of product management, and finding those people are quite hard. But then you need to teach them the specific skill part, whereas the other side, the specific skill part, but then you need to teach them the EQ side of the role. And I think you should probably also think when you're hiring, especially if you're a small team, what you can teach. So like if you are a payments expert and you've been in payments your entire career, you could probably benefit from getting a generalist product manager who's great at stakeholder comms, making sure that the backlog is clear. But you can teach them about payments and what the acceptance criteria for the right payment story is. Whereas if you are more of a generalist, a great general manager, or more of a leader rather than a functional expert, find people that have the desire to learn the more EQ side of things, but bring that hard skill. So it depends. I was talking to someone recently and I was like, there's so many constraints in product and building these organizations. And I think one of the constraints I had recently was that I met this amazing product manager and she was an expert in something that I really want to do next year. But I don't have, if I hired her now so that I would have her there, and I wouldn't have the headcount for what I needed to do now. And sometimes you just need to make a decision based on the information that you have at hand.
Yeah. Thank you so much for just your kind of complete open honesty, transparency, and just chatting through everything, answering everybody's questions. It's been really great having you here.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been great. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the people on the call as well. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Can I ask one last question really quickly, which I can't believe I didn't ask at the start? Where does the name N26 come from, and what does it mean?
There are many stories. I'll leave you with a couple of options, and you can all decide. So the first one is that there are 26 ways to solve a Rubik's Cube. The second one, I can't even remember what the second one was. Let's just say the second one. Yeah, the second one is something that's clearly not true. And the third one is it has something to do with the address of where they started the company.
Fair enough.
I really hope it's the Rubik's Cube one.
It's definitely the Rubik's Cube one. I think it's the Rubik's Cube one still. I actually have never had the answer confirmed, by the way.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you find out, definitely let us know.
I'll put it in the comments.
And for anyone that joined a bit late or wants to rewatch it, if there were some pearls of wisdom that you want to watch again, we're gonna put the whole thing live on our YouTube channel literally after we finished here. So check back on in about 5 minutes, and you'll be able to find the whole thing from beginning to end. Margaret, Anne, do you want to just run through some of the other events we've got coming up?
Yes, we have another fireside chat with Pip Jamieson, who's the founder of The Dot. So that's towards the end of July. We have our weekly investor coffee mornings, our book gem pack at the end of July. So any TechHub founders can sign up for that. And then we also have in about 2 weeks a great, Perdie, I'm going to need your help on this one. I know we were just talking about it earlier today, but I'm completely
an event coming up which is all about returning to work in a COVID-19 world. So if you're a startup and you're thinking about starting to bring your team back into the office, or you've got questions about whether you can bring them back to the office, any legal questions around that, any insurance questions around any liability that you have, we've got an event with an insurance expert and a legal expert and the facilities manager at TechHub, who talks about kind of building safety government guidelines to make that a smooth transition. So you can check that all out on our website as well. So we'll say goodbye. Thanks again, Georgie.
We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Okay.